Lesson 9 of the memory section, the effect of anxiety on the accuracy of eyewitness testimony. My name is Nick Redshaw and I have over 16 years experience of teaching A-level psychology. I'm also co-author of the highly successful Independent Learner student series of workbooks exclusively available on Amazon. The effects of anxiety on the accuracy of eyewitness testimony. All of the artificial studies that we have looked at so far have shown that eyewitness testimony is unreliable because it is affected by misleading information. However, other laboratory-based studies and studies on real-life crime scenes show that recall can be very accurate for certain information, depending on the level of anxiety involved at the time of the crime. According to Easterbrook in 1959, his hypothesis, attention is focused on the informational central to the source of the anxiety and will be remembered, while peripheral details will not. This is known as attention narrowing. In support of this hypothesis, Loftus 1979 set up an artificial scenario in the following study. Loftus 1979 Weapon Effect Study. The aim, to investigate the effects of anxiety on the accuracy of eyewitness testimony. Procedures, a lab experiment using an independent group design. Group 1 witnessed what they believed to be a real-life violent crime scene involving a knife. The control group witnessed the same person in a non-violent scene holding a pen. Both groups were then asked to identify the man from 50 photos. Results. More participants in the control group correctly identified a person holding a pen than in the group that witnessed the person holding a knife covered in blood. Conclusions. Loftus concluded that the participant in the first group focused on the knife rather than the personal details of the perpetrator, thus supporting Easterbrook's hypothesis. I'd now like you to complete the following question. If you're using one of our workbooks, or if your teacher has downloaded our workbook from TESS, complete it in the workbook, or complete it on a piece of paper. Identify one possible ethical issue with this research. Explain how psychologists would deal with the ethical issue. You may want to stop the video at this point in order to complete the question. Okay, welcome back. The participants in Loftus 1979 were deceived as they were led to believe it was a real situation, i.e. real-life violent crime scene involving a knife. Due to this, it may have caused psychological harm to the participant. Care, control is needed here. If the participants become too distressed, the experiment should be stopped and the participants fully debriefed, offered counselling if needed, and given the right to withdraw. Additional research by Loftus and Burns in 1982, where participants were shown a violent crime, found that participants had impaired recall for peripheral information. This study supports the findings of the earlier research into the effects of anxiety on eyewitness testimony. However, like the other studies, it is a laboratory-based study and may not reflect what happens in real-life crime scenes. In an attempt to address this issue, we look at research carried out by Ewell and Cutchell. Ewell and Cutchell, 1986, the effects of anxiety on eyewitness testimony in a real-life crime scene. The aim, to investigate the effects of anxiety on eyewitness testimony in a real-life crime scene. Procedure, a natural experiment using a repeated measures design. 13 witnesses from an original violent crime carried out in Canada, where a shop owner shot dead a thief. They were interviewed a few months later, and these were then compared with statements given to the police immediately after the event. The witnesses were also asked to rate on a scale of 1 to 7 how stressed they were at the time of the incident and whether they had experienced any issues since. Results. The eyewitness accounts were found to be very accurate and detailed and not just focused on the weapon. In addition, the accuracy and the amount of information recalled did not diminish over time when interviewed a year later. The accounts were not influenced by leading questions. The more stressed participants had 88% recall compared to 75% for the less stressed participants. Conclusions. What conclusion can you draw from Ewell and Cutchell's results about the effects of anxiety on the accuracy of eyewitness testimony? Also make reference to the implications of this study on the findings of research into post-event discussion. This is for 6 marks. You may want to pause the video at this point in order to complete the question. Okay, welcome back. Ewell and Cutchell was the first investigation in witness testimony to use real witnesses of a real incident and found that eyewitnesses aren't as inaccurate as laboratory studies suggest. In addition, instead of stress having a negative effect on memory, it actually has a positive effect, making something more memorable. However, as the violent incident was extensively covered by the media, participants would have access to post-event discussion, i.e. source monitoring, in this case confirming the original statements leading to accurate recall some months later. In another real-life study, Christiansen and Hubernet, 1993, interviewed witnesses to a bank robbery after several months. They found that the victims, those who had experienced most anxiety, could recall the details with more accuracy than the bystanders. They concluded that anxiety leads to high accuracy in real-life situations. Evaluation. Strengths. Research into anxiety uses laboratory experiments with high levels of control, so has high reliability and cause and effect can be established. Field experiments by Peters, 1988, found that participants who visited a healthcare centre were better able to recognise a researcher than a nurse who gave an injection, so supporting Loftus and Burns' research into weapon focus. Real-life studies have highlighted that anxiety actually improves memory and that this effect is long-lasting. These studies have high mundane realism. The research has important practical and real-life implications for eyewitness testimony. Limitations. Lab experiments lack realism, so findings cannot be generalized. It has been suggested by Johnson and Scott, 1976, that it may be the unusual situation the participants find themselves in that causes the focus on the weapon and not anxiety. Therefore, there are validity issues here. Is the research testing what it should be testing? The real-life studies are small scale and involve small samples. They also lack control, so cause and effect cannot be fully established. There are serious ethical issues with all the research into the effects of anxiety on eyewitness testimony, as they all involve some degree of distress to the participants. Okay, finally you've got your homework independent task. Discuss research into 2 or more factors that affects the reliability of eyewitness testimony. Now if you're doing an AS, this will be worth 12 marks. If you're doing the full A-level, this will be worth 16 marks. You may want to pause the video at this point and come back in about 15-20 minutes after completing this task. Okay, welcome back. So, marks for this. There's no more AO1 marks from moving up from 12 marks to 16 marks. So you've got 6 marks of AO1 and you've got 10 marks of AO3. Obviously if it's a 12 marker, 6 and 6. So, likely content. Knowledge of research into 2 or more factors affecting the accuracy of eyewitness testimony. The most likely ones that you've probably used are those named in the specification, i.e. misleading information, post-event discussion, and or anxiety. So, for misleading information, you've got Loftus and Palmer's 1974 experiment where the verb in the critical question was changed, smashed, collided, bumped, hit or contacted. Loftus and Palmer, did you see any broken glass? Loftus and Zani showed that even small differences in the word, i.e. the and a, broken headlight. Loftus et al, the red Datsun stop and yield sign. So details of all of those for AO1. Post-event discussion, outline what's meant by source monitoring, theory, the effects of conformity, Bodner's research here, post-event discussion. Wright et al. 2000, pairs of participants were shown a series of photographs depicting a wallet theft. And you could have also used anxiety. Loftus 1979 weapon focus experiment. Loftus and Burns 1982 found that participants who saw violent crime, where a boy was shot in the face, were less likely to be affected by leading questions. Ewell and Cutshall found that witnesses who had been most distressed at the time had accurate recall. Christiansen and Hubernet found that victims of genuine bank robberies were more accurate in their recall than bystanders. So, details of any of those pieces of research for AO1 is appropriate here. AO3 discussion. Obviously, use of lab experiments in most of the cases with high levels of control, so has high reliability and cause and effect can be established. Field experiments like Peter's 1988 study with the nurses is good for sort of showing reliability and validity. However, there are issues of validity in lab studies in comparing it with real-life studies. Johnson and Scott's research, you may have included that. Methodological issues including sampling, use of small numbers, replication, demand characteristics of lab research. Zaragoza and McCoskey argue that the results of lab-based experiments into the accuracy of eyewitness testimony may be influenced by demand characteristics. Foster argue the consequences of eyewitness testimony not important as real-life eyewitness testimony, so there are issues with ecological validity. Obviously, there's countless ethical issues you could discuss here. Obviously, I mean the anxiety caused by witnessing crime scenes, and even in lab-based ones where the participants think it's a real crime scene. And what are the practical implications of this, and for the development of the cognitive interview? All of that you can discuss for obviously your AO3. And that brings us to the end of this lesson. So hopefully I'll see you in the next lesson.